Creeping Death, an undeniable Metallica classic, featuring songwriting credits from every band member, including Kirk, who wrote the breakdown when he was only 16. It is the song that they were like, hey, let's try do that again, during the creation of Master of Puppets, and it's the song that makes me headbang my brains out every time the breakdown starts.
However, amongst all the cool riffage that takes place, there's some even cooler bass stuff going on, lots of which you probably haven't noticed. So that's what we're doing today, over-analysing the bass line of Creeping Death. The first cool thing that happens is the bass does this cool intro fill before it goes into the main riff. I'm not going to go into this fill much now, but might talk about it a bit later. The first time the main riff's played with the bass and drums in as well, the bass never goes to the octave, it just plays on the open E the whole time. One interesting thing about the main riff is that the bass does not actually double the guitar. The guitar plays open E string into perfect fourth power chord, and the bass plays open E string into octave, and they both match respectively. Apart from the third power chord, where the bass keeps playing the open E string. The bass also slides down from the 7 into the tail of the riff, but it does not continue this later. Before the verse starts, you get this cool chromatic phrase from the bass. The guitars stop playing to transition into the verse, have a bit of a break before it starts, but the bass and the drums keep playing to keep the momentum up. Now, before we get to the chorus, we need to talk about modes. For those of you who don't know what modes are, they're just like a scale, but shifted, as in the same notes, same order, but starting from a different note, so it gives you a different root note, and so a different feeling. The minor Aeolian scale is actually a mode of the major scale, Ionian, but since it's used so frequently, it's kind of just become its own thing. But another mode of the major scale is the Phrygian scale. I'd say the Phrygian mode is probably the most evil sounding mode. You can come up with quite metally evil riffs with it, as it plays heavily on the 6th of what would be the minor scale, which is quite a dissonant note. So in the chorus, it switches from E minor to E Phrygian, but since it's not a riff in E Phrygian and a chorus instead, therefore have Phrygian chords rather than a Phrygian riff. And so instead it kind of gives off this exotic, Egyptian, Bible story about lots of death kind of vibe. This is significant because if you listen to the lyrics of the song, the lyrics are about the latter part of the story about the Hebrews in Egypt, from the book of Exodus, a biblical story about lots of death. So the mood created by this Phrygian mode fits the lyrical themes of the song quite well. Obviously the guitar plays Phrygian as well, but there's lots of little clever bits the bass does that emphasises this in a really cool way, which we'll see in a moment. So here it switches from E minor to E Phrygian, which corresponds to A minor. The reason the song can do this without being too jarring is because E minor and A minor, which is what E Phrygian corresponds to, share quite a lot of notes. In fact, every part of the song other than the bridge up until this point has had every note from A minor in as well as E minor. The only reason it's E minor is because it's using it more because it's the root note. But in theory you could put every part apart from the bridge in A minor basically, because the notes are in both. So going back to the main riff, that cool tail it does on the end, that's a very A minor-y tail. Root, second, third. And not only that, but the intro fill from the start, if you to look at it in terms of E minor, it would be the 6th and the 7th, which are kind of odd intervals to start a fill with. You can do it, it's just a bit unusual. Whereas if you were to look at it in terms of A minor, it would be the 2nd and the 3rd, which would be a lot more common. So these two things also maybe lend it more towards the A minor side than the E minor, even though it's in E minor, which makes this transition really smooth. So the song up to this point isn't in A minor, because the bridge exists and it mainly plays the E, but there are sort of hints within E minor before you get to this point, where it kind of plays more on the A minor-y notes. The guitar obviously also plays E Phrygian, chords from E Phrygian. But the bass is really smart about how it emphasizes the notes in the bass line. In fact, the bass does this cool thing of really only emphasizing the chord that the guitar's on. When playing over a chord, you can do 4 things. Play the root note, play the chord tones, the notes that make up the chord in that key. This emphasizes it a bit more. Play other notes in the key to make it a bit more interesting, or add a note that's not in the key if you're really going for something flavorful. The bass line here very much just emphasizes the chords that the guitar's on. This is because you've already switched from E minor to E Phrygian, so you don't want to make it too jarring. However, it doesn't just emphasize the note that the guitar's on the whole time. In fact, it's really smart with when and where it changes this. It keeps up just emphasizing the note that the guitar's playing, whilst the notes it's playing are shared with E minor. But when you get to the first note, F, which is exclusive to E Phrygian, it changes this and then plays an A in between them, which, like we said, A minor corresponds to E Phrygian. So it kind of adds more of that Phrygian vibe to it. Anyway, how it emphasizes certain notes is also cool, because Cliff Burton's an amazing bassist, so if he's just going to play E, he isn't just going to play E. Like the first part of the chorus, where he plays these chords that go like this. And then the second time through the chorus, it bounces between the low E and the higher E. So the classic, bassists only play root notes. Not true, but sometimes it does suit the song best, but even in those instances, you can still make it more interesting. So, like we said, the first time the bass kind of strays away from just emphasizing the chord and the note that the guitar's playing is when the Phrygian gets properly introduced for the first time, where it plays the A, which just so happens that A minor corresponds to E Phrygian. And this is no coincidence, obviously, because the second time the guitar plays Phrygian chords, the bass does this really cool fill on the F, the G, and the E. Which just so happen to be the first 3 notes of the E Phrygian scale. And so, once again, the bass is underpinning the guitar, underpinning that vibe the song has in this really awesome way. By choosing to be more standard just on the note on the less Phrygian parts, and more aggressive and fancy on the Phrygian parts, helps emphasize that vibe really well, considering the main riff and the bridge are not in E Phrygian. So you could think of that fill from the start as kind of foreshadowing, if you will, since if you look at the notes in E minor, they're a bit more dissonant and unusual than A minor, E Phrygian. Now, there's a cool variation of what it did into the verse the first time. On the first go through of the riff, last time it just played open E, now it doubles the guitar instead. And it starts playing an open E rather than sliding into the tail of the riff. When we get to the chorus again, it mainly does the same thing as it did before, but it's variation of the chords thing. Here, it just plays the main riff with variations with this cool other riff in between. I want to take a moment to talk about how perfectly I think the chorus sits underneath the guitar solo. When it starts playing the chorus notes underneath the guitar solo, like it's really cool listening to the guitar solo, the rhythm guitar, the bass, all like join up. And like hearing the same bass solo as you did before, but with like sick guitar solo over it's like really cool. One thing to note about the breakdown is that other Metallica bassists after Cliff played it different live. Well, they might not have played the whole song like he did, but it would probably just be the odd fill here and there. But this is like a key riff in the song, and they're playing it differently. Jason, for example, plays more with the guitars, and I guess gets the more like melodic version of the riff. Whereas Cliff decides to sync up more with the drums and go an octave lower for half of it. Also, a really cool thing about Cliff's version is that he goes to the B rather than just staying on the E. This is significant because 1, it fits harmonically since B is the 5th of E, so they can sit nicely under each other in the mix. But also, B is from the E Phrygian scale, and so having another note from the Phrygian scale being played gives it more of that Phrygian vibe. In verse 3 it starts with a slight variation of the main riff. Now, in the outro, the bass actually starts playing its outro riff before the guitars do. The last part of the song, the outro is actually played slower than the intro riff. The bass does these cool extra fast notes as well. So, that was Creeping Death by Metallica. Well, I've been Sam, hope you enjoyed the video.